In the Americas and Western Europe, the issues of transsexuality and climate change have dominated the left-leaning political discourse of the 21st century. In this video, I'm not going to discuss anything having to do with climate politics.
Pablo el Molinero, the honest reportero, crazy güero vaquero, straight shooter caballero.
Respect for our fellow humans and the right to pursue happiness as one sees fit have always been the cornerstones of what I have understood to be liberty in the free world. A libertarian point of view would say that if you're an adult and you're not hurting others or damaging society as a whole, you should be free to do as you please. It is the second part of that belief that has become one of the sticking points in the discussion of trans rights. This is especially true as it relates to children and the rights of parents to raise them with their own beliefs and values. And that brings up another huge problem in the discussion of transsexuality, namely the demand that certain aspects of the left-wing point of view with regard to trans reality and sexuality overall be accepted as fact. Look, I'm not a doctor, scientist, or psychologist, but one of the more outrageous concepts I have ever heard of is that of gender fluidity. That is when some people believe that who they are as a sexual being can shift one way or the other based on any number of factors. Biology doesn't shift, and biological creatures are actually bound by the reality of the reproductive process, whatever that encompasses for a given species. A common argument is that gender is separate from biological sex. Well, that's a neat trick, but it's still linguistic horseshittery. I could just as easily switch the word gender for preference and have basically the same effect. And to those who say that gender identity has nothing to do with sex, then what the hell are you even talking about? How you want to dress that day is one thing, but who you want to have sex with is the real question. Some people wake up in the morning and can't make up their mind if they're a boy or a girl or other until their second cup of coffee. Is this an oversimplification? Well, only to a certain extent. On a cellular or biological level, nothing has changed. So it is all in your head somewhere, and some people are more sexual than others. The brain is complicated, and in spite of what we do know about it, I believe we still have barely scratched the surface with respect to things like how we make choices. If someone chooses chocolate mint coffee creamer one day and vanilla hazelnut the next, has their identity changed? No, of course not. But in either case, they're definitely gay. Calm down. New rule. I'm allowed to make a stupid joke. It's just a joke. The danger comes when people try to indoctrinate children, especially young children, into this nonsense. As I stated before, you can't really completely separate gender from sexuality, and children don't understand sexuality. Young children might understand sex on some level, like there's a mommy and a daddy, but they have no reference point for understanding sexual feelings, much less sexual preferences based on their feelings. Even older kids who are being indoctrinated into the gender fluidity stupidity may be having their developing sexual identity distorted by that confusing and very unscientific point of view. And don't get me started with the pronoun nonsense. The pronoun debate is one of the most idiotic concepts to ever emerge from this whole ideology. It is almost certainly a product of our most radical elite academia. People who believe there are 20 pronoun options are the same morons who think that being queer for Palestine is a fine and completely logical idea. And many parents are at a loss as to how to react to their children when they are confronted by these brats who insist that the parents accept their illogical and ideologically driven assertions. They are afraid of alienating their babies, or more precisely stated, themselves being alienated by them. Even more egregious is when schools are allowed to withhold information from the parents, such as the nature of the curriculum being used in the education of their children, or even when a child might assume a sexual identity different from that with which they were born. So far, it is understood that parents still have the right to try to influence their offspring with their values and morality that conform to their own. I have always understood that to be a societal imperative. All parents certainly make mistakes, but ceding those powers to the state, especially a state that would seem to be dedicated to the breakdown of the family structure and that encourages alienation from any spiritual philosophy whatsoever, will almost certainly lead to a unified and almost by definition fascist society. My definition of fascism is basically that it's an ideology that doesn't allow or provide for dissenting viewpoints. If the family no longer matters and there is no spiritual outlet available, then what's left? Well, the state. Am I being alarmist about this whole thing? Well, fortunately, we haven't arrived at the boiling point yet, and there has been notable resistance to much of the trans and woke ideology. But there can be no doubt that there are proponents of the most extreme version of what I'm describing. There is still discussion, for example, about biological males being allowed to compete in women's sports. But I believe that public sentiment is moving away from the transgender point of view. And since I brought up the subject of athletes, and more to the point, men who claim to be transgender so they can use the women's locker room, there is a very underreported and underconsidered angle to the trend. It has to do with something called autogynephilia. Back in the day, it was known as transvestism or cross-dressing. Some men who aren't gay get pleasure from wearing women's clothes, and some of them get off on having women watch them naked in a dressing room. Wow, who could have guessed? What a shocker. And so now, in the spirit of Me Too, we're also supposed to believe all women, even if they're really men? Well, I'll tell you one thing you can believe. If you like this video and subscribe to this channel, you will help us grow. And while you're at it, please feel free to go to the channel and enjoy all of our free content. While you're there, smash the bell so you can be notified whenever new videos are released. Thanks again. This is all an offspring of the trend of woke ideology, which has infected our society and sadly has imprisoned the Democratic Party. There is a huge population of mostly white, college-educated, prosperous urbanites and suburbanites who have fallen full loco crazy for the insanity that is woke ideology. Nothing exemplifies this better than Drag Queen Story Hour. There are parents who take their young children to some venue, like a cafe, public library, or once upon a time even a military base, so that a man outrageously dressed as a woman can read stories to them. I can't even imagine what the parents are telling them about these people. Do they tell them they're transsexuals and therefore are actually women? As far as I know, drag queens are not transsexual. Do they tell them that this is all perfectly normal behavior? It most assuredly is not normal. Look, I have no doubt that drag queens are much like other people in that some are lovely, some are nasty, they have their own foibles, and they experience the same joy and frustrations of life that we all do. But it's not exactly a normal profession. Their type of entertainment is generally found in nightclubs or cabarets that children aren't even allowed to frequent. They are, quite literally, clowns for a mature audience. They dress up in funny costumes, wear funny makeup, and say and do things to entertain us. Drag queens are basically a parody of women. They take certain female stereotypes, exaggerate them, and use that as a basis for their performance. Frankly, I'm glad that people aren't more offended by drag queens. If you were to use that same technique using any number of other oppressed groups as the basis for their show, the consequences would be swift and you would need to defeasify all of your common summer cooling equipment. And what about Dylan Mulvaney? Is he a trans woman? Oh, please. Dylan Mulvaney may be a very talented person in his own right, but his campy, over-the-top behavior does not resemble that of any woman I have ever met. Dylan Mulvaney is a drag queen with less makeup. It is parody. Now, don't hate Dylan Mulvaney. Please, for God's sakes, don't hate drag queens, or anyone else for that matter. But don't tell your kids that it's in any way normal behavior. Those parents are fucking stupid. I saw a report on the news about a drag queen story hour, and one of their parents gave their kids some money. You know, like a $5 bill to tip the drag queen with. Not to hand her the money, but to place it in their costume like one might do with a stripper. What are these parents teaching their children? I can only hope one day those parents get a call from the school and the same kid tries to show his appreciation to his favorite teacher by giving her his lunch money. I have never been to one of these events, but I have seen reports that claim that many of the stories that are read to children normalize alternative sexual lifestyles. Well, kids need to learn about all sorts of things when the time comes, but I'm sorry, that actually does smack of agenda. At least it does unless they're willing to equally promote the other side of the coin, meaning the joys of heterosexual sex. How about a Sunday matinee at a strip club where women in G-strings and pasties sing Rafi's greatest hits while little boys and girls eat cubes of Jell-O off their undulating bellies? Well, okay, maybe not. I'm told the Sunday matinees at strip clubs are already fully booked. Now, let me address a personal question. Do I believe that transgender people exist at all? Well, actually, yes, I do. I can't speak intelligently about it from a medical or biological point of view, but historically there have been people who apparently feel more fulfilled after a full transition from the sex that they were born with. I also believe that the incidence of that extreme gender dysmorphia is much, much, much rarer than some would have you believe. One example that comes to mind is Wendy Carlos, who was born as Walter Carlos. She is a composer who has won 3 Grammy Awards for her album Switched on Bach and for her work on movies such as A Clockwork Orange, The Shining, and Tron. I don't actually know anything about Ms. Carlos' personal life, but I think I can make some fairly obvious assumptions. She must have been extremely unhappy as a man. As such, I can only imagine that her sex life was at best limited and unsatisfying. And given the relative rareness of the procedure in 1972 when she had her surgery, I suspect that her ability to have an orgasm and to have a full and satisfying sex life as a woman had at the very least probably been severely compromised. She never married and is said to be a very elusive person, but I have to assume that living as a woman was still more natural for her. And even then, her life doesn't exactly meet my understanding of what a healthy, natural woman is. I'm guessing that it was a compromise to an unhappy situation, but what do I know? I do understand that sexual fulfillment means different things to different people. Some people don't think much about sex at all. And I understand that an orgasm doesn't necessarily define what's important to everyone with regard to what they consider sexual fulfillment. But it is for most people. And there's enough available proof that I don't feel the need to provide any documentation to make my point. And this goes very much to the point of what may be damaging to society as a whole. I still refuse to divorce gender identification from sexuality. While some may try to argue that gender is entirely a social construct, most people allow their penis or a vagina to guide them toward their gender identity and their sexual orientation. Like I said before, it's not about how you want to dress on a given day. At some level, you are talking about sex despite what one's sexual orientation may be. Confusing young children with this gobbledygook could impede the natural and organic decision of who they are. If I may make a simplistic analogy, it's like trying to explain the whole menu of a fine dining restaurant to your child before they even sit down at the table. When they get there, they'll look around and decide what appeals to them and make their choice. You're only confusing them by explaining the merits of tuna confit versus that of beef marrow mousse. Young children need to learn other skills like reading and social skills like how not to show their appreciation to their favorite teacher. And let's look at another over-affected group, teenage girls. Many of them run in cliques and feel extraordinary peer pressure to conform to what the group does. Do you remember the so-called pregnancy pact? In 2008, a group of 18 high school girls from Gloucester, Massachusetts all agreed to get pregnant during the school year with the goal of raising their children communally. I don't have any idea what happened after, but I think most sane people can agree that it's not the most prudent approach to family planning. Now, some teenage girls who may feel awkward in their still developing bodies are being told that the real problem is actually because they might be boys born in a female body. Again, the whole concept is just too trendy, for lack of a better word, and peer pressure also seems to play an outsized role in some girls' decision-making process. I guess that it might not matter that much, except that many of the treatments for what the girls believe is ailing them are irreversible and could lead to life-changing regrets in later years. I'm talking about puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and gender-affirming surgeries. It may seem like I have an obsession with the importance of sexual pleasure in a person's chance of leading a full and rewarding life, but I do believe that young people are putting that part of their life at serious risk by undergoing certain treatments. And predictably, there is a whole medical industry that is more than willing to participate in these treatments that will result in patients needing extensive, lifelong care. Dr. Joanna Olson Kennedy was the lead researcher in a $10 million taxpayer-funded study of the long-term effect of puberty blockers on the mental health of the children in the study. The project, which began in 2015, followed 95 children suffering from gender dysphoria. The average age of the children was under 11 and a half years when they were initially administered puberty blockers. After the 9-year study concluded that there was no mental health benefit to the children, what did the good Dr. Olson Kennedy do? She decided not to release the findings because she feared they could be weaponized by the critics of gender-affirming care for children. You think? When the results of her scientific study didn't match her personal goals and agenda, she intentionally suppressed the information. Puberty blockers are used to chemically castrate sex offenders. Claims by some in the medical community that the effects of puberty blockers are temporary and reversible are dubious at best. Decreased fertility and lower bone density are two of the more commonly understood physical side effects of their use. I also read statistics that claim that up to 85% of patients who undergo gender reassignment surgery are able to achieve orgasm after time in extensive rehabilitation therapy. Personally, I don't believe those statistics. It's only a hunch, but I believe they're lying, or at least dealing with a highly controlled group of patients. I'm just saying that there are vested interests in the gender care industry. Again, look at the behavior of Dr. Olson Kennedy and tell me that everything is above board. I can't say if this is sanity finally coming into play, but a 2025 Oxford academic study found a higher risk of mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts in patients who underwent gender-affirming surgery when compared to those who didn't. There is a case before the Supreme Court right now, Childs v. Salazar, which challenges a Colorado law that, among other things, would prohibit a licensed mental health care provider from challenging a minor's assertion of their mistaken gender identity. That is to say that if a boy comes in and claims to be a girl, a mental health expert is not allowed to suggest that there may actually be another underlying cause and suggest therapy to investigate the situation further. Basically, it means that they must believe all children. Well, this is just basic stupidity. Children are stupid. Children can be intelligent, but they are ill-equipped to make certain irreversible and life-altering decisions. That's one of the reasons that a 15-year-old can't just walk into a tattoo parlor and get some anime demon slayer permanently stenciled across their face. That's one of the roles and duties of parenthood, to protect and orientate our children through the difficulties of life. Clearly, when these issues come up with children and their parents, there is some very real and very raw pain going on. The angst and isolation that many young people feel these days is very real. I personally know a young person whose anxiety attacks were completely debilitating, and the parents were at a genuine loss as to what to do about it. Another sad truth is that much of the medical community is also compromised by woke ideology, financial interests, and frankly, a lack of true understanding about how to deal with this very real crisis affecting young people these days. They may assert that they know what they're doing, but the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. Just for example, there is a justified perception that antidepressants like SSRIs are way overprescribed and the long-term effects are clearly not well understood. I have already documented here some of the abuses from certain corners of the healthcare industry. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know what the solution is, but just examine the reality for yourself. If the widely accepted standards of treatment are applied, but the situation that such practices are meant to alleviate grows or deteriorates, then something is not working. Almost by definition, it means that our health care system has failed us yet again. In the not too distant future, I intend to make a video on just that subject. Laws should also be constructed to reflect those realities with regard to transsexual treatment for children. It's a sad truth that once they're 18, we lose control of what our children are allowed to do. Hopefully, parents still maintain some influence over what they do. This is Pablo El Molinero.